Well, we're currently being joined by Mr. Hisham Mundol, Chief Advisor of the Environmental Defence Fund of India, to give us a perspective on a pressing problem that we in India face. Now, just to give you some idea, in the first 270 odd days of the previous year in 2024, India ended up witnessing extreme weather events on 255 of those 270 odd days. So that's basically a strike rate of almost 93%, which is extremely worrying indeed. And this year has not been very pleasant either. We had extreme weather events in Jammu and Kashmir, in Punjab, in Himachal Pradesh, as well as Uttarakhand. And there's been extensive damage to both life as well as livelihood. So let me in fact speak to Mr. Mundol on why this is happening with the frequency that it is and what can be addressed or what can be done rather to address the situation on the ground. Mr. Mundol, thank you for taking time out to speak to us. Tell us about why this is happening at the frequency that we're witnessing.
Sure, and thank you for having me, and thank you for raising this very important issue. In a sense, a lot of it is directly attributable to the carbon emissions that we have been putting into the environment, not any time now, but since the start of the industrial age. Over a period of time, with every ton of carbon that you put in, there is an impact. It makes the world warmer. What we are now seeing is the cumulative effect of 150 years of industrial growth. A lot of it, to be fair, without the without the guardrails of saying how do we do this more sustainably, and now we're looking at the impacts on the environment. Rising temperatures means rising sea levels, means inconsistent wind patterns, which have an impact on rainfall. Some places are experiencing floods, and there are places which are experiencing droughts as well. So all of this, or a significant portion of this, is man-made emissions since the start of the industrial age. It is not an India-only problem, and it is not an India exclusively caused problem, but India is home to the largest majority of vulnerable populations.
Now, there's been a call for action as far as you're concerned. You've basically said that the current climate models that we have are not able to keep up pace with the change in weather patterns that we're witnessing, and that this requires an urgent upgrade and an urgent intervention. What is it that you're specifically driving at, and what are some of the specific ways in which this problem can be addressed?
Sure. So I'll reframe that with one nuance. It's not just the current climate model, but it's the current growth model. If you look at India's situation and what we are looking to do over the next 10, 20, 50 years, this is an economy that has the rightful ambition of saying, hey, we want to double the size of the economy every decade for the next few decades. That growth, in a sense, is non-negotiable. That is the growth that is going to lift folks who are below the poverty line higher up and improve the living standards of everyone. You cannot negotiate that part out. What you can and should do is the only way to get that growth, the traditional high emissions intensity growth models that the North Americans and in Europeans and Chinese have worked on. While India is not part of the climate problem because we're only 4% of historical emissions, we are 1/8 of American per capita emissions. We are 1/4 roughly of European or Chinese emissions, and we can and should make the case for this, consistently and concertedly at every international forum. The reality is that we can't afford to grow in that same model. And the reason why we can't afford to grow is those emissions stay here, and our poor, our health infrastructure, our food systems simply wouldn't be able to absorb the shocks. So what therefore do you do? Do you either reduce your growth ambitions? That we don't want to do. What you can do is start figuring out low carbon ways to deliver that growth. The most classic example is increase the renewables footprint in your energy systems. That gives you the energy that you need at zero or significantly lower emissions. So that's one aspect of what we can do. The second is a lot more focus than already is there on energy efficiency. It is the least glamorous, I would argue, the least glamorous part of climate action because it's not some fancy new, shiny toy that you can latch onto, but it delivers the greatest amounts of emission saving and cost saving. The third angle that I would put is we often think about growth and sustainability as in conflict with each other, but you've got enough and more examples where growth is actually coming from sustainability. uh, the best examples of that are electric vehicles, LED bulbs, high energy efficiency ceiling fans. A number of business sectors have opened up where people aren't, it's no longer a conflicting situation. It's that sustainability that's actually driving your growth because almost always a lower emission footprint means lower costs, means lower prices, means higher volumes and higher value.
So, what you've addressed is basically one part of the solution. If we come specifically to why this has been happening as frequently as it is and why it's been causing the kind of devastation it has, there's also an issue here of infrastructure development, perhaps the need for better forecasting, and also better disaster management, because too many lives are being lost. Now, one can understand the fact that these weather events are happening and they're happening at an alarming frequency, which is, of course, a cause for worry, but they're also leaving behind a massive trail of destruction. What can be done to minimize the latter in particular, and what's not being done that ought to be done with some urgency?
Sure. And one way that you can look at the framing on this is to try and understand what is the total impact of any decisions that you're absolutely right in terms of infrastructure improvements, in terms of disaster management. Those are all areas that we can and we should be doing more on. But what I mean by total impact is let's take a hilly terrain area right now. Um, because it's forest land, uh, you can get a lot of ecotourism. That's going to be your mainstay of economic value creation. How do you decide what is the right level? How do you make sure that you don't exploit it so much that you weaken building codes, you don't control the number of tourists that are there, that eventually will lead to the kind of disasters that you're talking about and that we've seen in a number of hill stations. Um, Looking at that total cost is one aspect of it. I'll give another illustration. Biofuels. Should we be exploring biofuels? Absolutely, we should be exploring biofuels. Should you, however, also look at the total environmental footprint? What kind of crops are we talking about? Is it providing adequate income to farmers or incremental income to farmers? It is, and it should. So that is a tick. Great. What is the environmental footprint? What is the water footprint? What is the impact on food security? Once you start looking at things much more holistically, and it's not easy, and it does sometimes force policymakers to pause on some decisions or nuance them in some manner. But unless we start doing that across all aspects of how we run things in the country, we're always going to have those challenges.
Now, since you spoke about renewables as well as biofuels, it appears that this government has a blueprint. There is a national biofuels policy that first was devised in 2018. It's been upgraded in 2022. We've also set targets in terms of ethanol blending in petrol as well as diesel. So all of those targets are there. There's also a larger net zero target of 2070. Even at climate events, including perhaps the upcoming COP30, we will take the stand that we've always taken. that there needs to be greater collaboration between the global north and the global south in terms of enabling developing countries in particular to make that transition towards renewables. So there's a climate fund that's been a big bone of contention between the global north and the global south, and lack of commitment on the part of the global north. So India has actually been quite aggressive in putting these issues in multilateral fora at the forefront. But what's your assessment of what's actually happening on the ground in terms of implementation? Are there serious shortcomings that you witnessed that need to be addressed with some urgency?
Short answer to that is no, there aren't serious shortcomings, but I'll come to that in just a moment because you talked about the role of India on the global climate stage. And I think one of the most heartening things that we have seen in the last year and a half is in a world where there is considerable uncertainty, countries going back on climate commitments, countries questioning climate science. India has been singularly shining in terms of standing firm on the fact that climate change is real, climate change needs to be acted upon, and these are the things that we are doing. When you're sitting in India, this doesn't seem like such a big deal, but when you contrast it with what's happening in the rest of the world, you realize how how lucky we are that we are in that kind of a situation. It's not a party politically divisive issue. You don't have businesses actively conniving, against climate policies. We don't argue about it. That's really positive. Now, um, what is India doing in addition to what you said on the global climate stage? I think India can and should make a much more concerted effort about on organizing the global south to make those demands, because it's not just about collaboration, it is about hard cash. The simple principle is that the climate crisis has been caused not by what we do today and tomorrow, but like I said at the start, what we've done since the start of the industrial age. It's the richer industrial countries that have contributed significantly more to emissions. And by any reasonable principle, it's the polluter that should pay. So there needs to be climate finance that is real. Now, the second part of, or the main part of the question that you asked is India doing enough? Um, India genuinely has the opportunity to show a different growth model to the rest of the world. Amitabh Kant more eloquently describes it as the opportunity for the first the opportunity for the first major economy to industrialize without carbonizing. Now, is this just a great tagline or is there more to it? Let's look at the renewables commitment. A commitment of having 500 gigawatts of renewables or 50% of your energy mix is massive. Is it just a commitment? We've crossed the 200 gigawatts mark. So there's real progress there. Is the job done on renewables? We're nowhere near it. Every additional gigawatt that you need to put up is going to be more difficult than the previous one. We have 200 plus gigawatts of capacity, but we're not able to fully integrate that into the consumption of the grid. So we have to figure out what are those bottlenecks that are preventing far more adoption of it. So that's certainly there. The third is that, one core factor of anything on energy has to be balancing the risk of your portfolio. You don't want to have all energy sources from one. So making sure that you have, as much as much wind and hydro as you're looking at increasing solar is an essential part of managing the risk. Looking at nuclear as a safer option should also get much more attention. So I'll say that there is more to be done, but building on a great foundation as far as the renewables capacity side is concerned. The integration side is not as rosy a story, and we should spend more time on that. Um, Oftentimes, the question that gets asked is, what is the role of fossil fuels in all of this? Um, for multiple reasons, there remains a role for fossil fuels in our energy mix. what we can do is, if you burn coal to make thermal power, you will get carbon dioxide. There's really nothing you can do about that. Chemistry tells you that that's what's going to happen. But what we can avoid, and what I don't think we're doing as good a job at, is reducing the other emissions that come from thermal power, sulfur dioxide and the particulate matter. The air quality problem doesn't actually come from carbon dioxide directly. It comes from particulate matter. Uh, we can and should do much, much more at much faster timelines, with more aggressive commitments and larger investments on reducing those emissions. So that's one area that I think we should do more on. The second thing that will be very helpful is if we start putting a price on carbon, a real price on carbon, that will incentivize more action. It will reward companies that are doing better, and will punish companies, conversely, who are not doing as well. The Indian government's recently announced carbon credit trading scheme is going to be our first compliance market in the country. You can easily see it have the potential to become one of the world's biggest compliance markets. And that's a really big positive step that has been taken, and look forward to seeing how that builds out. The third part is, when you look at the agriculture sector, there's two ways you can frame it. One is to say that half the methane emissions come from agriculture, or what about the crop stubble burning that's happening in some states, and how that contributes to air quality. At the same time, farmers are on the front lines of the climate crisis. And so we have to find solutions that deliver a triple win to them. What is this triple win? It has to raise incomes, it has to secure yields, and it has to deliver environmental benefits. So, synthetic nitrogen fertilizer optimization, or dairy productivity, or sustainable fisheries, all of these are things which will help the planet in the long run, but will help farmers in the here and now.
That's a very practical approach that you've prescribed. It's not quite drill, baby, drill, as Donald Trump would say, but at the same time, it's not the other extreme either. So it's a very balanced take. I just want to end with one question on since you mentioned carbon credits. Now, the government has recently tried to come out with a blueprint or a taxonomy on climate finance. This was also something that was announced by Nirmala Sitharaman during both the economic survey and the recent budget in February. But uh, how evolved is, I mean, how robust is this system and its potential in India? Because other countries have actually taken the lead in developing a compliance mechanism which is already under implementation, so much so that, for example, there is in the civil aviation industry a scheme that called Corsia that's soon going to take effect in 2027 as far as India is concerned, because that's when we enter the mandatory phase. Now, making the transition to something like aviation fuel or bio-aviation fuel is going to take a longer time. So, in the immediate short term, we have to be therefore reliant on offsetting our emissions by purchasing carbon credits. Now, there are a certain number of sources from where those credits can be procured, etc. And we're still working out as to what's most feasible for us. But in terms of India actually emerging as a strong compliance market for carbon credits, what's the potential? Why is it still in its infancy? Were we late in waking up to this? What's your take on this entire matter?
Sure, and I'll talk about carbon credits in just a moment. But you mentioned green taxonomy. There was the Reserve Bank of India's guidelines on climate risk disclosure. India has two choices. It can either be a follower or it can be a leader. And I would urge that as a great nation, we should start looking at becoming a leader on these issues rather than necessarily following, standards or directions that are set by elsewhere. Uh, the second aspect that I'd make is things like climate risk disclosure and taxonomy. Why are you doing all of that? You're doing that, A, to make sure that there is clarity and consistency about what is green and what is not green. From a reporting perspective, if I'm a customer of a product, I want to know how, what the actual footprint, etc. is. But I'm also doing it to generate finance, to create channels where financing is a lot easier. In that context, it makes a lot of sense to be aligned with how the rest of the world is looking, because you don't want somebody sitting in London or New York or Paris or wherever it is that they have the money to sit and say, yeah, yes, I want to give, but I'm not sure what the definitions are. So leading quickly and rapidly to bring out these standards and making sure that you're evolving them with how the rest of the world is moving and beginning to influence the rest of the world rather than necessarily following guidelines should be our approach across the board. On carbon credits, why has India been slow? Um, India, when you look at how long it's taken other countries, the European Union is regarded as, one of the best
Yeah.
emission trading schemes because lots of it is working well now. But it's 20 years in the making. The Chinese have taken 10 to 15 years. So these things take time. So I wouldn't for a moment begrudge the government and the work that they're doing on that one. Um, there's two things to look at on carbon credits. One is the compliance market and making sure that you have the right monitoring, reporting, and verification systems. As I know, work which the government is expending time on, making sure that you have the right modeling and analytical capabilities, because you are never going to get it right on day one. No market has ever done that, and markets by nature are fluid and dynamic, and things happen. Technology changes, regulatory changes, etc. So building that capability to be able to identify emerging trends and responding to them will be helpful. On the voluntary side, which is the voluntary carbon credit side, it can be a important revenue source. It's not going to be as gigantic as sometimes you read in some of these reports, but it can be an important source. There is a global integrity question on carbon credits, on voluntary credits. And what India can do is to make sure that we invest enough time in better regulation of the voluntary market so that the standards are clear, and you emerge from, you reach a situation where Indian credits are regarded globally as the finest credits that are out there, because you have strong regulatory oversight in terms of what qualifies as a voluntary credit, how is the monitoring being done, how much of the value of a credit does the end consumer end community on the ground get. There are a number of these building blocks, and I think in both those areas, India has the potential. The good thing is India has a lot of the talent, a lot of the global talent pool on carbon credits actually came from India because of work that's historically been done. So I wouldn't put it as all negative. There is a lot to be optimistic about.
Sure, we'll wait and see as to how it evolves. But we've covered a fair amount of ground in this fairly short discussion. It'll be nice to get in touch with you once again, Mr. Mundol, to do a deep dive on maybe one such issue that we can actually have a detailed discussion on for the perspective of our viewers, because obviously this is about generating awareness and sharing knowledge. And of course, a lot of steps do need to be taken, and India does have a blueprint in mind. Let's see how the policies that have been prescribed are actually implemented. But thanks for sharing your insights with us, and we hope to chat again with you soon.
I'd be absolutely delighted. Thank you. It's been a lovely conversation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.